Emmerdale tease that the tranquil rhythm of the village is about to be disrupted by a sinister undercurrent, as Joe finds himself spiraling into a maelstrom of anxiety and danger. The lush dales and quiet corners of Emmerdale seem to mock Joe's inner turmoil, for within his mind is a storm that no one sees, except, perhaps, for Crowley. It begins subtly. Joe's smiles are a little too forced. His glances over the shoulder, a little too frequent. At first, Sam assumes it's just stress, nothing more than Joe overthinking, perhaps a result of the recent transplant that left his health fragile and his confidence shaken. But then Joe confides something that sets off alarm bells. "It's Shaun," Joe whispers one morning, seated in the quiet of the back room at the Woolpack. "He's blackmailing me." Sam stiffens. The name alone is enough to sour his expression. Shaun had always hovered at the edge of trouble, a figure half reformed, half reckless. "What's he got on you?" Sam asks, leaning closer. Joe slides a crumpled piece of paper across the table. Sam reads it once, twice. No name, but a threat clear as daylight. A demand for money. A promise of consequences. "He left this in my flat." "It's him, Sam." "I know it." Joe's voice trembles as he speaks, but it isn't just fear, it's something deeper, older. Sam can see it in Joe's eyes. This isn't a new fear. This is something Joe's been living with. The decision comes fast. Joe tells Sam he's going to fire Shaun. "I need to get rid of him, now, before he escalates." But Emmerdale has a way of punishing the brave. The confrontation is supposed to be quiet. Shaun is to be called in, given his notice, and asked to leave the premises. But instead, it erupts into violence. Joe, his nerves frayed, barely manages to stand his ground before Shaun lunges. It's a savage punch, sudden and brutal. Joe stumbles, hits the ground hard. He doesn't see Sam coming this time. He doesn't see anything. Everything fades to black. When he wakes, the room is sterile and too bright. Monitors beep steadily beside him. Pain pulses through his skull. But nothing chills Joe more than the figure standing at the foot of his hospital bed. Dr. Crowley. He looks unchanged. Polished. Cold. His expression unreadable. For a moment, Joe thinks it's a hallucination, a cruel trick of a concussed brain. But Crowley steps forward, his voice smooth and low. "Long time, Joe." Joe's breath catches. Memories rush in, unbidden. The surgery. The transplant. The complications. And Crowley, always there, always too close, always watching. Crowley, who once held Joe's life in his hands. "What are you doing here?" Joe croaks. Crowley's smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Just checking on a former patient." Isn't that what good doctors do? But Joe knows better. There is nothing benevolent about Crowley's visit. Behind that calm voice is an old threat, cloaked in civility. Later, when Sam arrives, Joe tries to downplay it. He mentions the fight, the concussion, the painkillers. Anything to avoid telling Sam the truth. He doesn't say Crowley's name. But Sam sees the cracks. He sees the fear Joe tries to hide. "This is more than just Shaun, isn't it?" Sam asks one night. Joe says nothing. But silence is an answer too. Days pass. Shaun has vanished. No one has seen him since the attack. The police have questions, but Joe is evasive. He claims he doesn't remember the details. Maybe that's true. Or maybe it's fear speaking again. Because Crowley isn't gone. He keeps appearing. Always just outside Joe's periphery, at the hospital, on the street, once even standing across the village green, staring. Joe finally admits it one evening, voice barely above a whisper. He wants something. He said he'd make everything worse if I didn't agree. Sam demands answers, but Joe won't give them. Not yet. Maybe he's ashamed. Or maybe the truth is too dangerous. Crowley is a man who trades in secrets. Joe knows that from experience. Once, he was desperate. Sick. He needed a transplant, and Crowley made it happen, too fast, too conveniently. Joe never asked how. He didn't want to know. Now he fears the cost. What did Crowley do? Who did he hurt to save Joe? Joe doesn't know. But the fear gnaws at him. One night, he finds another note. Like the one Shaun left. But this time, it's typed. Precise. Cold. You owe me, Joe. That's all it says. But the meaning is clear. Joe burns the note. He doesn't tell Sam. But the darkness is closing in. It begins with a file, left in Joe's mailbox with no sender, no envelope. Just a grey folder filled with medical records, timelines, names. One name stands out among the others, Alicia Grant. The donor. Joe stares at the pages, his heart pounding. He remembers the name from a passing mention in the hospital, but he had never seen the face. Now it's there. A young woman, barely 25, eyes bright with life. Gone, apparently, in a car accident. But something is off. The timelines don't match. According to the file, Alicia died 2 days after Joe's transplant. Which is impossible. Joe is suddenly cold. He confronts Crowley in the only place he knows he'll find him, behind the private clinic on the edge of Hot 10. Crowley doesn't deny the accusation. In fact, he seems almost pleased Joe figured it out. Alicia was never supposed to be your donor, Crowley says. But time was short. The board would never approve. So I made the call. Joe feels sick. You lied to me. You forged everything. I saved your life, Crowley snaps. Don't ever forget that. And now it's time you paid it forward. He hands Joe a flash drive. There's a list. Of people. Donors, recipients, arrangements. You'll deliver it to the address in the note. That's your job now. You're part of this. Joe backs away, shaking his head. But Crowley's next words freeze him. Or would you rather Sam see this file too? Maybe the police. Maybe Alicia's parents. Joe takes the drive. He doesn't tell Sam. But guilt sits heavy in his chest. Sam begins to notice the change. Joe grows quieter, more distant. His phone buzzes more often, and he always steps outside to take the calls. Sam asks, but Joe dodges every question. Then one day, Sam finds a second flash drive tucked in the back of Joe's drawer. He opens it. What he sees makes his blood run cold. Documents. Videos. Audio logs. A secret network involving Crowley and others, illegal transplants, hush money, false records. And Joe's name, signed more than once. Sam confronts him that night. Joe breaks. Everything pours out, the blackmail, the lies, the truth about Alicia. He begs Sam to understand, to forgive. Sam says nothing. The next morning, he's gone. Joe searches the village, calls everyone. No one has seen Sam. That night, he receives a message. A video. Sam, tied to a chair, bruised and blooded. Crowley's voice, one last job, Joe. Then he walks. Joe doesn't hesitate. He drives into the night, not knowing if he'll ever return. But this time, he won't run. This time, he has a plan. Because Crowley made one mistake. He underestimated Joe. Joe's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The night swallowed the road ahead, headlights carving narrow tunnels through the dark. He had memorized the route Crowley gave him. An industrial estate on the outskirts of Leeds, quiet, forgotten. But this wasn't just a delivery. This was his final act. Inside his coat pocket was a second flash drive, one Sam hadn't found. Joe had made copies, spent nights gathering every scrap of evidence, piecing together the monstrous puzzle. If he was going to go down, he wouldn't go alone. If he didn't return, this flash drive would. As he pulled into the estate, a chill ran down his spine. A warehouse loomed in front of him, its windows blacked out, its entrance guarded by a single figure, Crowley. "You came," Crowley said, voice laced with satisfaction. "I knew you would. Loyalty always was your weakness." Joe stepped out, the drive in his palm. "Where's Sam?" Crowley gestured toward the building. "Inside. Alive, for now. Deliver the data. Make the trade." Everyone walks away. Joe handed over the drive, but there was no tremble in his fingers. His voice was steady. "Let him go." Crowley turned toward the warehouse. "Bring him out." Two men emerged, dragging Sam between them. Blooded, but conscious. Sam met Joe's eyes and shook his head subtly. Joe stepped forward. "Now let him go." But Crowley raised a hand. "First, let's make sure you didn't tamper with." He didn't finish the sentence. Lights erupted across the warehouse perimeter. Sirens howled in the distance. Helicopter blades chopped through the night air. "Police?" Joe whispered to Sam, "Run. Now." Chaos broke. Officers swarmed the building. Crowley shouted for his men to destroy evidence, to escape. Joe and Sam stumbled into the night as a standoff erupted behind them. Hours later, back in Emmerdale, Joe sat in a small room at the police station. Across from him, D.I. Travers tapped a pen against his notebook. "You've been through a lot, Joe," Travers said. "But this evidence, it's massive. You've exposed a trafficking ring, falsified medical records, bribery, half a dozen charges." "Crowley's finished." Joe nodded. "And Sam?" "He's safe. In the hospital, but he'll recover. Thanks to you." Joe exhaled. A weight seemed to lift from his chest, but it didn't float far. Days passed. Then weeks. Emmerdale returned to its steady rhythm, but Joe's life would never be the same. Sam forgave him, but it was a long road back. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. They spoke often, but there was a distance, a space Joe understood he had to respect. Joe took up work again, quietly. No more secrets. No more running. He worked with the police, helping identify others in Crowley's network. People he'd never met. Patients who had no idea how they'd been saved. Families who never knew what had been lost. One morning, he received a letter from Alicia Grant's parents. He opened it with shaking hands. "We've read the truth. It broke our hearts. But we also know you never asked for any of this. Our daughter saved you. That can't be undone. Make her proud." Joe cried for the first time in weeks. The final reckoning came in court. Crowley stood in the dock, pale and furious, as evidence mounted. Joe testified. So did Sam. So did families, patients, nurses who had once trusted Crowley's brilliance. He was found guilty on all counts. Life in prison. No parole. After the trial, Sam placed a hand on Joe's shoulder. For the first time in months, he smiled. A year later, Joe planted a tree at the edge of the village, beside a small wooden plaque. For Alicia. For truth. The village watched, quietly supportive. They had seen the worst and the best of him. But Emmerdale forgives. Eventually. Joe stood back, sun on his face, wind in his hair. Peace didn't come all at once. But it came. And Joe knew, finally, that he had earned it.